It sounds like this is a good time to talk about readiness, because I think readiness is such an important topic, isn't it? Because as we've said, that part of our brain that, you know, the superego bit, which is going, right, okay, that's it, on Monday, you stop, you know, actually isn't, as we've been saying, isn't necessarily aligned with the other parts of our being. And I think rather than putting ourselves through those self-punishing cycles, to understand readiness and the importance of readiness is really useful. What would you say about readiness, Scott? Because this is something you're discussing with people at the centre all the time, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and one thing I've come to see is just a great amount of compassion for a lack of readiness, because it's often not what it appears to be. It's like it appears to be like a kind of a non-compliance, you know, or, you know, pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get this, you know, start working with this. And and this goes to the moral stigma and the shame around addiction, because we tend to punish and judge people because they're not ready, you know. But when you take a deeper look, a lot of the times the readiness is because their system is overwhelmed by the unresolved trauma or the deficiency stories. And it's a lot like what was just said. It's like in the moment I'm standing in front of the refrigerator, or I've got the phone in my hand to call the dealer, my system feels overwhelmed, my front brain is shut down. And it's not that I'm morally bad or that I just can't stick to my commitment. It's that I'm literally in survival mode. And so a lot of people who look like they're not ready are actually dealing with issues that haven't been resolved. And you can place no blame on them for that, because if you do, you miss the point completely, is that they're not sitting here going, how can I defy my commitment to quit? How can I destroy and consciously sabotage my recovery? It's not like that at all. They're actually acting on a kind of automatic pilot, and they're at the mercy of that. So there has to be a lot of compassion. And then just, you know, are you open now to look at this? Because this is showing you something. This lack of readiness is showing you what hasn't been looked at. And then I found no other way. The only other way is that bit of willpower. So it's like, okay, just make the commitment not to drink, and so that can work for a while. But as the issues are not resolved, it can very easily lead back to a slip on the drinking, or a slip. And then that slip, because the issues haven't been resolved, can lead back into the cycle. So it just, for me, keeps coming back to, are we looking at what's going on underneath this, rather than, you know, the judgments about whether someone is ready or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that at the center, you kind of use the motto of trauma first. And that's certainly true with the work I think that most of us are doing as facilitators. And so much that at this point, I've started to say nervous system first. Because when there's so much trauma happening, the nervous system is so ramped up. And of course, that front part of the brain is offline, or at least not being utilized at full capacity. It makes it really hard to be able to meet what's underneath the addictions, right? So settling into that nervous system and really getting a relationship with one's nervous system, to me, is a real part of the readiness. It's not a mental readiness. It's a physiological readiness that's really important. It's really a part of our mechanism, this physiology. And when that comes online, and for me anyway, when it became very connected to and interrelated with, then that supported my looking. That really supported the ability for me to rest with the terror that I experienced, and that allowed me to be able, ready, and willing to feel the pain that I didn't think I could feel. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without a nervous system that was being supported. And I just love that you're, let's bring compassion into it. Our nervous systems are desperately needing compassion. And we're certainly not taught how to do that for ourselves as children, most of us anyway. So at this point, that invitation is so powerful.
It's quite a shock, though, to discover what is lying underneath maybe a relatively simple addiction. Like, I've been working on my chocolate addiction. The first time I did a living inquiry session with that, looking at that, it seemed like it was going to be a very straightforward thing of just looking at the compulsion to eat chocolate. Then I found a contraction in my throat, went down and into that. And before long, I discovered I was looking at this image of a 18-month-old baby, me, screaming out to be held. It was like, I want, hold me, hold me, hold me. And it felt like nobody was holding me and that I was unwanted. It was profoundly shocking to discover that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I was wondering, Melanie, what's your experience of the link between trauma and addiction?
Well, for me, I came to this work having done some heart-focused meditative work beforehand that started to help me work with my nervous system. So I really had just by chance done what Lisa was saying and started to work with my nervous system first, because I was a terrified person and I lived with anxiety all the time, and I was always sure that I was wrong and that I was going to be attacked, and it was misery. So that started to soothe some of that. And then when I learned about rest, oh my God, you mean let it all be as it is? I actually had a little bit of gumption to approach all this ugliness that I thought I was going to find about me because I'd rested my nervous system in this other way first, but then to come into this rest and allow it all to be, then I was able to start to see that what I thought were simple, like you say, simple things like I thought I just liked chocolate and Diet Coke. I didn't realize at the time that I actually had a bigger food addiction going on. But what was underneath those was this need to look good and be a certain weight and be a certain shape. And then beneath that, it was all the things that happened when I was a kid where I didn't feel like I was accepted in my family and that I was the outcast and the black sheep because I stood up for things that others didn't want to even look at. So all the trauma had to be looked at. It couldn't be set aside if I was going to start to heal what was the superficial, what I thought was the real thing, but was really the superficial, the food addictions and the worry that I consider addiction to worry and so forth. It was necessary. And I was ready then, but I wouldn't have been ready 5 years before. No way.
Thanks, Melanie. I just wanted to bring Lizabeth in, because Lizabeth, I know we can't see you, but do you have any thoughts on readiness?
Yeah, I concur wholeheartedly with this notion of that the nervous system has to be ready, and also what struck me when you guys were talking was this being judged by others as to whether you're ready or not. And this ties in with what I discovered in my own case after I was free of the addiction to sugar and chocolate, was that there was this addiction to negativity that kind of passed through the radar of natural rest. It was like this negative voice that it's like instantly online. The least little thing, like being stuck in traffic or the key not turning in the lock, or even just looking at my email inbox and there's no messages there that I wanted to get. This sort of like voice that goes like, yeah, right, or oh no, or this negative, this cynic, this judger, this great judger of life. And so I noticed that was like an identity that had come on that was like socially acceptable. Like everybody's doing it. And so it harkened back to in my own case when I was trying to break the addiction to sugar and chocolate. It's like my own family members were all just like that. They were this is cynical voice of negativity that's socially acceptable. It's like, like, why can't you just get over it? Come on. It's like this. So anyway, that's my thoughts at the moment on readiness. It's like if somebody judges you for not being ready, and maybe even your own mind, that's just a negative voice that you can question. Who is saying that? And to whom is it saying it? And just look at those identities and let those come into the light.
Just to piggyback on that, since we're on this topic of compassion, is what we started to do at the center now. And I think we're going to roll it out with the facilitators. But I think in some sense, the facilitators already do this because the facilitators do a lot of their own looking, right? We know that because they've been through the training. You can't get through it without doing that. What we've done at the center is try to look within ourselves at any sort of judgment or resistance that we might have with someone who's not ready. And there's an interesting play of dynamics that happens when you're trying to help somebody if you're not coming from a place of real clarity and unconditional love. And it's very hard to put into words, but we've seen it over and over at the center. So if a facilitator finds a client who's not ready, and the facilitator begins to resist or judge or be angry or afraid in that session, the client reads it and then will not feel safe to be open. We actually have had that. So what we're trying to do here at the center is to point everybody, so it's kind of a job duty here at the center now, that you write out all your triggers as they happen in real time. And then you chart out how you're looking at it. And so with the idea being that, because at a treatment center, you have people doing all sorts of things that are not compliant, right? They're breaking rules, they might relapse, they might be disruptive in a group. And as the facilitator's reacting or resisting that, the clients read it and they take it as, so there's the interesting play of dynamics between that is so, and if you talk about Jonathan Hari, he's been out there talking about how unconditional love is the answer to addiction. And I think it's one of the pieces of the answer. Certainly is very important. And so if you can, and it's exactly what we're talking about, because when we talk about rest, what we're saying is, can I unconditionally allow what's happening in my own experience? But also when we're working with other people, can we unconditionally allow them to be exactly where they're at? And maybe we can't. But then when we know that we can't, we can go in and take a look at why we can't. And then as that gets cleared up, there's a space that's revealed. So I think that somehow this healing of addiction, because this is not the way the addiction treatment is done, I'll tell you. The way that it's normally done in this space, this treatment center space, is that clients act out and you write them up, or you pull them aside and you tell them in some ways that you're doing things wrong. And what the client internalizes that, and it often boosts their deficiency story, which is the reason they became addicted in the first place, because they weren't living up to parents and all these ideals. So that's what happens in the addiction treatment space, this sort of judgment and punishment and write up. And so what we're trying to do something different here is to look at that within us, that desire to control. And we look at things like, I need them to recover, or whatever pops up. And then something happens when a facilitator is super clear around, like, just okay with whatever happens. Then we can still take action. Like, we may still need to write someone up because they've broken it, but it comes from a different place. And when it comes from a different place and there's no judgment around it, and the client feels that the facilitator is super clear around it, it just seems to be that things move more quickly for the client. So, I know the facilitators are already doing this, and we're going to do it even more, because I think that's one of the key components of it.
Thanks, Scott.